The psychiatric hospital, the mental institution, the asylum, places where people with clinical depression, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder all go to get treated. But what if you were just some random guy with none of these disorders and you just happen to walk in there and get lost? What kind of encounters will you have? Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for these true scary stories where normal people like you and me with no mental illness went in and got lost. Walking by a mental institution at night. What could go wrong? This wonderful encounter happened a year ago, when I was walking back home from my girlfriend's place. Ever since the first day I walked her home, I made sure always to do it, especially if we stayed out late. I mean, safety first. Plus, I got an enormous hug or a kiss in return. My Achilles heel, I guess. My house is approximately half an hour walk from her, but I didn't mind one bit. There was always a possibility of getting on a bus, but I love walking, enjoying the brisk air, starry sky, and the sounds of silence. Stuff like that. That night, however, I wanted to take the bus, mostly because I had a sprained ankle, and it happened a few days before. Wasn't too serious, but hey, I'd be damned if a sprained ankle stopped me from going out with my lady. We ended up staying longer than usual. It was around 2 a.m., if I remember correctly. So a bus was out of the equation. See, in my city, the last bus takes off at midnight. So yeah, the night was once again my companion. To get to my house, you have to pass a mental institution. I'm not even kidding. The only way to not pass by is to take a longer route, 30 more minutes of walking, and my foot wasn't exactly in the mood. So there I am in the dead of night, beatboxing to a pentatonics track. Yes, I remember that part of the dot. Here's the thing, I live here. The institution is like 10 minutes at most from my house, so I've gotten used to it. It's not like in most stories where you hear screams and ominous fog is seeping out of each crack. Not one bit. If anything, it's like a campus. The ground even hosts a medical school. Plus, they have a pretty sweet basketball court where people rarely play. I mean, not to insult anyone, but most patients aren't really in a shape to play. So my friends and I spent a lot of time there, and it's safe to say I knew the entire place. Also, that's where I screwed up my ankle. So yeah, I'm walking by and my brain, being the scumbag it is, reminds me of all the creepy stuff that might be hiding within the darkness of the grounds. It's contrasted the illuminated street perfectly. Well, perfectly for me to shit bricks. I try my best to neglect the thoughts, compose myself, and walk home as fast as possible. I almost made my way to the bus stop when I notice a guy standing there, as if frozen in place. I don't remember much of his features, but he immediately gave me the chills. There was no reason to, though, as he was seemingly not even paying attention to me. He was just standing there, focused on the opposite side of the street. I didn't stop, but slowed down, giving myself enough time to try and analyze whether the guy was drunk or high or something. I mean, he was or is waiting for a bus at 2 a.m. There was a bus schedule on the stop, so I figured there was little chance of him not being aware the bus wasn't coming. I remember muting my music and putting my hand in the pocket of my pants, positioning my keys between my fingers. I just felt incredibly on edge, unable to explain why. I guess I just don't feel at ease in such situations. Who can blame me? As far as I remember, the guy looked normal. He was dressed casually, not as I would imagine a patient from the institution would be. I traced his gaze, but saw nothing on the other side of the street. Nothing. The area was empty. Just the two of us. Even as I passed by the man, my pace remained very much the same, not wanting to alarm him or trigger anything. The scariest thing of all, even though he paid no attention to me before, He started moving right after me, right after I brushed past him. He didn't hesitate a single moment, for all I knew. I firmly believe he was able to grab me at that moment, but he just walked behind me. I figured that he would wait until we reached one of the less illuminated parts of the street if he wanted to do anything. It's just too strange of a coincidence, but I had to confirm it. Even though I was not the bravest guy around, I was good at concealing panic. Theater actually helped me in real life, so I just continued walking as if minding my own business, didn't even look behind me. Since nothing was blaring in my ears, and having headphones actually helps isolating sound and having a better perception of where something is coming from, I was able to hear his footsteps behind me. I decided going against further down the street, as I would usually do, but instead made a sharp turn right into a street with a dead end. Lo and behold, the guy was still on me. Since there was a glass building nearby, I was able to see him losing his balance, probably thinking I'd continue forward, before continuing to trail me. Now, before you think you must be an idiot going into a dead-end street, remember that this is my turf, for the lack of a better word. I know the layout by heart. Trying not to give out any hints as to what my next move would be, I sped up, as if I had a rocket up my ass, and I hoped that I wouldn't literally have one, totally neglecting my ankle. I made another sharp turn, making it seem as if I was heading for the building entrance. Instead, I bolted for the small fence, then jumped over it, not wanting to slow down until I would be out of sight. Halfway to my house, I looked back, and it seemed as if I lost the guy. I did relax a bit, deciding to slow down a bit, but still trying to get myself as fast home as possible. That was the only time I saw the guy, and although I vaguely remember some rumors floating around that a few patients had escaped the institution, there was no proof of that, and I don't think I pursued the matter. Besides, as I said, the guy did not look like a patient. Since I've had contact with some of the patients in the past, I knew that what kind of clothing they were given, and therapy watered most of their reflexes down. This guy was far too sharp. So, bus station guy that made my ankle take longer to heal. Let's not meet ever. Well, I can run even faster now. Take that. My boyfriend's night in the hospital. My boyfriend, John, recently stayed in a mental hospital for a few days. His grandma, with whom he lived, thought he was suicidal. He was not, but he got a good story out of it anyways. He shared a room with an older guy. Apparently, this guy did not really leave the room except to eat. John kinda got the skeevies around him, but was only going to be there for a few days, so he decided to stick it out. This double room had a bathroom with a shower in it. John went to take a shower one night. The door did not have a lock on it. A few minutes later, he heard some weird noises inside the bathroom. He turned the water off and looked outside the shower. There was the old guy, pants around his ankles, staring at John, masturbating. John quickly got dressed and called for help. Apparently, the staff refused to call the police because they didn't want to cause a scene, or they didn't want the old guy to end up in jail or something like that. And they were not going to move John to a different room either. Needless to say, John booked it out of there. My wonderful stay at a mental hospital. In early March, I was admitted into the mental ward of a hospital for some depression issues. I went through a bad breakup and attempted suicide, but that's another story. It was my first time going to a hospital for such reasons, and I was kind of nervous since I had no idea what to expect. Well, the floor I was on was pretty small, and because of that, they kept everyone with all different kinds of problems in the same ward. This meant that I could be placed on the same floor as anyone, from someone struggling with anxiety or some serial killer. The group was pretty diverse. I spent 2 weeks in there and it wasn't too bad. There was a few weirdos, but for the most part, The people admitted were just depressed like myself. For the first week and a half, I had a roommate named Anita. She was a lot older than me. I'm 20 and she looked about 60. My first encounter with her made me feel pretty uneasy. Now, note that each room has one bathroom, meaning that we would have to share it. I walked into the room and set my bags down, and the first thing she said to me was, "When you go to the bathroom, could you please wipe off the toilet seat? I'm carrying a virus." My mother and I immediately exchanged alarmed looks, but I replied and said that I would. Anita left the room shortly after, and in walked in my nurse. She introduced herself, and then my mom and I asked her about the virus. The nurse rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, she doesn't have anything. That's just part of her illness." Fair enough. Anita was nice, but she was a mystery. I couldn't help but wonder what ran through her mind to come up with something like that. We had no problems though. She was quiet and would lay in her bed all day long, from morning until night, staring at the ceiling. She laughed to herself, sometimes quite loudly on occasion, just random bursts of laughter while staring at the ceiling. That creeped me out a bit, but I guess I just wasn't used to it. Anita and I got along well, and that was that. And then comes John. John creeped me out from the first moment I walked into those doors. He sent me a death glare right away, and just gave me this real uneasy feeling from the start. He was about 45, with a beard and droopy eyes and no teeth. He had a huge gut, and would let his undersized shirt go up far past his belly. He did things like stood in front of the TV in the lounge and turned the volume on blast, hoping that someone would tell him to turn it down so he could pick a fight. A fellow patient asked him if he was tired, and he would threaten them, yelling, "Want me to break your fucking teeth in?" He would go into people's rooms, fart, and then leave. I found that kind of humorous, until he did it to me. One day I was sitting in the lounge reading a book when I noticed him walk in with some candy. He went around the room, offering some to other patients, and when he got to me, I politely accepted so that he wouldn't kill me if I said no. I clearly wasn't thinking, as I popped the candy into my mouth and continued with my reading. When he left, a patient turned to another patient, the only other person who took the candy, and asked, "You didn't eat that candy, did you?" The man shook his head. "Good, 'cause I saw John walking down the hall just then, with his hand in his pants." Almost puked right then and there. Yum, sweaty ball candy. As if that wasn't weird or gross enough, he proved himself to be even more of a creep. During the last few days of being at the hospital, the nurses moved me to a private room for some reason. I was relieved to finally have some privacy. I kept my door open during the nights because I liked the light from the hallway. On the last night spent there, I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I stayed up reading until around 3, went and got a glass of milk, and then finally decided to try to force myself to sleep. I was laying on the bed with my back to the door when I heard John come out of his room and roam down the hallway in just his underwear. He briefly talked to and complained at the nurses before heading back to his room. Before doing that, he noticed my door open and decided to take advantage of it. Since he could only see my back, he must have assumed I was asleep. Everyone else was at that hour. I heard him creep into my room and then felt him hover over me. He started breathing really heavily and stayed there for a good 2 minutes before farting and leaving. I was scared shitless that he'd come back and kill me, so I told the nurses, and they promised they would keep an eye on him. They also assured me that the surveillance cameras were running 24/7, so they'd see if he tried anything else. Luckily, I left the next day, and I'm hoping that's the last time I'll see him. Thanks for reading. My encounter at the mental asylum. So this encounter won't be quite like the others posted because you could say I invited this onto myself, and I would tend to agree with you. Maybe a long story. I probably won't go back and cut it down though, I'm incapable and long-winded. Just on the edge of rural Maryland, my friend and I went to an infamous mental asylum that's been shut down because of abuse in the 70s to explore and take pictures. We arrived around dusk because that was when the sun casted the longest shadows and everything appears to dart at the corner of your eyes. We crept into the perimeter and approached the first building that seemed accessible. It seemed to be an old dormitory that was pure menacing in the shadows. It was dead quiet and getting darker by the second while we tried to gain entry. All the windows on the bottom floor were securely boarded up, but on the top floor they were not. We climbed up on a shed and were able to knock the top half of the window so that it slid down. What's important was that only the top half was open, the rest of it remained locked tight. It was a really tight fit for us as we crammed ourselves in. When we put in our respirators, which avoided toxic particles, and started poking around, it was super creepy. The rooms had bed frames and chipped dressers, and even various personal papers lying around. As I was happy jaunting my friend, and we had ventured downstairs, he ran up to me after he had gone for only a second and said, "I think someone's living here." I dreaded this, but had definitely come across homeless people before, so I went with him to check it out. Sure enough, on the stairs were maybe a month or two of accumulated human feces. Thank God I had my respirator on. As we got down the first flight, we looked around for the second flight in the pitch darkness that was the first floor. My friend looked incredibly tense because he apparently had heard shuffling feet when he came to me. "Hello! Anyone living here?" I shouted. I have been through this drill before. "We're not the police. We're just looking around, please. Please holler if you would like us to leave your home." We were met with dead silence, and we both stood anticipating very nervously a voice on the other end. When there was none, I picked up my high-powered flashlight to shine into the entryway room. Right as I flicked the switch, we heard the unmistakable noise of a man shifting his weight and running across the room, knocking over what sounded like plastic bottles as he came. Fucking nope. My friend and I didn't need to see it with our own eyes. We both turned tall and bolted, but I peered back as I rounded the corner and caught a glimpse of a very crazy-eyed, very filthy gentleman about my size, 6'2", 190 pounds. I ran as fast as I could without tripping. We went into the room we entered from, the only way out. I closed the door that led to the hallway between me and stood there with a board I'd picked up. No, I didn't want to fight a crazed homeless dude, but my body was in fight or flight, and I couldn't flee through that small window gap without exposing myself to crazy homeless murderer. I stood there with my weight against the door, while my buddy tried to widen the window gap. I could hear the man pacing outside. He sounded some distance away from the door, but was unmistakably walking back and forth. Each time he got nearer, you could actually hear his fast breathing. I didn't even bother try to explain again that we weren't cops. I just braced the door with my weight. After a bit, we had to make do, so I slipped through the window gap as quickly as I could, while he watched my back, and then he followed only a lot more quickly, being a nimble short Asian man. After we got out, we told our friends, a pack of girls, about the encounter, and then told them we intended to keep exploring. We got picked up by security guards not extremely long after that, and we informed them that they had a squatter and that he might be violent, and the look on their faces was not happy.